All right, so you've probably seen this name in the headlines lately, Tulip Siddiq.
Yeah, she's been making waves.
She's the UK's economic secretary to the Treasury. And so that means she's like the one in charge of, dealing with financial corruption.
Right, keeping things clean.
But the ironic thing is that she's facing allegations of corruption herself.
Yeah, talk about a twist, right?
Yeah.
It's not your everyday political scandal, that's for sure.
Definitely not. So to get into all the details, we're doing a deep dive into an article from The Independent, and they're known for having some pretty strong opinions.
Yeah, they don't hold back.
So to set the stage, we need to go beyond the UK for a minute and head over to Bangladesh.
That's right, because this is where Tulip Siddiq's aunt comes into the picture.
Okay, so who is her aunt and why is she important to this story?
So her aunt is Sheikh Hasina, and she was actually the prime minister of Bangladesh until just last August.
Oh, wow, so pretty high up there.
Yeah, but she was ousted in a student-led uprising, and now her party, the Awami League, they're the ones under fire.
What are the accusations against them?
Well, there are a lot of allegations of corruption flying around, and some pretty serious ones, too.
Like what?
Claims of money laundering. They're saying that the Awami League was using properties in London to move money around.
And it gets even crazier, right?
Oh, yeah, the Anti-Corruption Commission in Bangladesh. They're looking into claims that Hasina's family embezzled a massive amount of money, like billions, from these infrastructure projects.
Wow, how much are we talking here?
3.9 billion pounds, to be exact.
3.9 billion, that's not chump change.
Not at all.
And so this is where Tulip Siddiq's connection to her aunt and the Awami League gets a little messy.
It does, because it raises the question of a conflict of interest,
I mean, yeah, if she's the one responsible for going after corruption in the UK, but she has ties to a party accused of corruption.
It definitely makes things complicated. And it goes beyond family ties, too. Siddiq has a history with the Awami League.
Like, what do you mean by history?
Well, she actually lived in properties that were owned by people linked to the party. And she even went to the signing ceremony for a Russian-backed nuclear power plant in Bangladesh.
Wait, so the person who's supposed to be cracking down on corruption was potentially buddy-buddy with a party accused of, massive corruption?
That's what it looks like.
It's kind of like putting a fox in charge of guarding the hen house.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? And there's more. There's this quote from Siddiq's website, although it's been deleted now.
What did it say?
Well, she straight up said that she worked for the Awami League, like she was part of their UK and EU lobbying unit and their election strategy team.
So she was actively involved, not just a passive bystander.
Right, it wasn't just a family connection. She was in the thick of it.
This raises such a huge question. Like, can someone really lead the charge against financial wrongdoing when they've got these kinds of ties to a party that's accused of it?
That's the core issue here. It goes beyond just actual wrongdoing. It's about the perception of a conflict of interest. Even if she didn't do anything wrong in her current role, these connections could really undermine public trust.
Yeah, because when people start doubting the integrity of those in power, it creates this cynicism.
It does. It can make people less likely to believe that the system works, that their voices matter. It's like a crack in the foundation of trust that could threaten the stability of everything.
That's like, why bother, right? If they're all corrupt anyway.
Exactly. And The Independent is really hammering this point home. They argue that in a role as sensitive as hers, even the appearance of a conflict of interest can be damaging. They're saying when you look at someone in charge of upholding ethical standards, you expect them to be beyond reproach.
You want them to be squeaky clean.
Right, like Caesar's wife, above suspicion.
But in this case, it's more like the niece, and there's definitely some suspicion swirling around. So how has this whole thing played out in the UK's political scene?
Well, it's gotten pretty heated. Kemi Badenoch, who leads the Conservative Party, has called for Siddiq to be fired, like right away. That shows how politically charged this has become.
So the Conservatives are saying off with her head. But what about her own party? What do the Labour folks think about all this?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Ooh.
Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party, he's decided to stand by Siddiq, for now at least. But there's definitely some unease within the party, especially considering what Starmer has done in the past.
What do you mean?
Well, remember Louise Hay? She was a Labour MP who had a minor conviction, and Starmer acted really quickly, removing her from her position. No hesitation.
So he took a hard line then, but he's being more lenient now.
It seems that way, and that's why people are raising eyebrows. It looks a bit like favoritism, doesn't it?
It does make you wonder.
Yeah, and this all leads us to the heart of the matter, the ministerial code, and the importance of public trust.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly is the ministerial code, and what does it have to do with all this?
Think of it like a rule book for government ministers, a set of guidelines for how they should behave.
Okay, like a code of conduct.
Exactly. And one of the key principles is avoiding conflicts of interest, making sure their personal interests don't interfere with their public duties.
Makes sense. So the Independent is arguing that Siddiq has potentially violated this code.
They are, and they have a pretty powerful quote from their editorial. Ministers must ensure that no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between their public duties and their private interests.
So it's not just about actual wrongdoing, but about avoiding even the appearance of it.
That's right. But the tricky thing is, how do you measure perception? It's subjective, isn't it?
It is, yeah. What one person sees as a conflict of interest, another might not even bat an eye at.
Exactly. But in this case, the sheer size of the accusations against the Awami League and Siddiq's past involvement with them, that definitely fuels the perception. It's not like we're talking about a parking ticket here.
No, we're talking billions of pounds potentially stolen from public projects.
Right. And that's why the Independent is arguing that Siddiq's position has become untenable. They're saying the damage is done to her reputation and to public trust. It's hard to see how she can effectively do her job with this hanging over her head.
So they're basically saying that even if she is cleared of any wrongdoing, the damage is already done.
But that's their perspective, and it's a perspective shared by many. They believe that to regain public trust, she needs to step down, even if it's just to clear her name.
Wow, that's a tough call. It's almost like they're saying that her staying in office sends a message that there's a different standard for those in power.
It's a provocative argument. It raises some big questions about accountability and what it means to be in public service. But before we get into that, let's take a quick break and we'll come back to unpack the next part of this story.
Okay, so we left off with the Independent saying that Tulip Siddiq's position is untenable, but she hasn't stepped down. What's happened since then?
Well, it seems like she's trying to address the situation. She's referred herself to Sir Laurie Magnus.
Who's that?
He's the independent advisor on ministerial standards. So basically, she's asking him to look into the allegations.
So like an internal investigation.
Yeah, it's a way for her to say, hey, I've got nothing to hide, investigate me. But it does kind of buy her some time, you know?
Yeah, I mean, she gets to stay in her position while the investigation goes on. But does that really address the Independent's concerns?
Not necessarily, no. They're still arguing that even with an investigation, the perception of a conflict of interest is still there.
It's hard to shake that off, right?
It is. And how can she really be a credible voice against corruption when she's facing these accusations herself?
It's got to be a huge distraction, not just for her, but for the whole government.
Absolutely. And the Independent even pointed out that Siddiq had to pull out of a trip to China with the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, because of all this.
Oh, wow. So even her own party is worried about the fallout.
It seems that way. And it comes at a bad time for Reeves, too. She's getting ready to deliver her first budget, and the economy is, not exactly booming.
Yeah, the last thing she needs is a political scandal stealing the spotlight.
Right. So what does the Independent think should happen now?
Yeah, do they have any suggestions?
Well, they do say that stepping down might be a tough decision for Siddiq, especially if she maintains her innocence.
That is fair.
So as a compromise, they think that Starmer should, at the very least, take away her anti-corruption responsibilities while the inquiry's going on.
That's kind of a middle ground, right? She gets to stay in the government, but it addresses the most obvious conflict of interest.
Yeah, exactly.
But do they see that as a long-term solution?
No, not really. They still believe that stepping down completely would be the most ethical thing to do. The damage to public trust is just that big, they say.
So they're saying that even if she's cleared, her reputation might never fully recover.
That's their argument.
It's a tough situation. It kind of makes you wonder, if you were in her shoes, what would you do?
Yeah, it's a tough call.
It's almost like a lose-lose situation.
It is. And the Independent brings up some historical examples of politicians who faced similar accusations and clung to power. It usually doesn't end well.
So they're trying to warn her, maybe?
Yeah, like learn from the mistakes of others.
So they're really urging both Siddiq and the Labour Party to think about the long-term consequences, not just the immediate political fallout.
Right, they're saying this could have a ripple effect. If this is mishandled, it could really damage public trust in the government as a whole.
It's like, if we can't trust them to handle this, what else can't we trust them with?
Exactly.
So where does this leave Tulip Siddiq? What are her options at this point?
Well, it's a crossroads. She can dig in her heels and fight to keep her job, but that means facing more scrutiny and pressure.
Yeah, it could get even more intense.
Or she could step back, let the investigation happen without the added pressure of being a minister.
So it's either fight or flight.
In a way, yeah. But each path has risks. If she stays and the investigation finds something, it could be the end of her career.
Yeah, that's a gamble.
And if she steps down, it might look like she's admitting guilt even if he's innocent.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. And it's important to remember that this isn't just about her. It's about the integrity of the UK government and how much the public trusts those in power.
It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And as we move towards our final thoughts, it's worth thinking about what this whole case says about UK politics today.
It's like this whole thing with Tulip Siddiq. I keep coming back to this one question, like, what message does it send if she just stays in her position?
It's a good question. It's like, if she's in charge of fighting corruption, but she's facing these allegations herself.
And she just stays put. Yeah, what does that say?
It might look like there's a different set of rules for those in power, right? Like they're not accountable in the same way.
Exactly. And it undermines the whole thing, doesn't it? The whole idea of tackling corruption.
It does. People might start to think, well, if they can't even handle this, what can we trust them with?
And you know, this goes back to Sir Keir Starmer and all his talk about a new kind of politics. He promised honesty, accountability.
Yeah, he did. This feels like a real test for him, doesn't it? Like, is he going to walk the walk?
It does. But let's say, just for argument's sake, she's totally innocent. Wouldn't stepping down make her look dusty?
Yeah, it's a valid point.
Yeah.
And she's denied any wrongdoing, right? Plus, she's asked for the independent investigation.
So she's saying she has nothing to hide. But even with that investigation going on, can she really do her job effectively with all this hanging over her head?
Hard to say. It's a tricky situation, right? It's not like a clear-cut case of corruption. There's politics involved, motivations, a lot at stake for everyone.
So it's up to Sir Laurie Magnus, the independent advisor, to figure out what happens next.
Yeah, he's the one who'll decide if a full-blown investigation is needed.
But even if she's cleared, it feels like the damage is done, you know? The whispers, the suspicion.
That's the tough part. It shows how easily public trust can be broken, especially these days.
This whole thing, it's like a snapshot of what's going on in UK politics right now. All these questions about accountability, transparency, people losing trust.
Yeah, it's a symptom of something bigger, isn't it?
It makes that call from the independent for Siddiq to step down even more interesting.
Yeah, it is.
It's like they're saying this isn't just about one person. It's about setting a higher standard for everyone in government.
They're saying if you're in a position of power, you need to act with integrity, even if it's hard, even if it means making sacrifices.
Powerful stuff. So as you're following this story, we want you to think about it. What does it tell us about UK politics today? How should our leaders be held accountable? And what can we do to bring back that trust in our democracy?
Big questions, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're the right ones to be asking.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll keep following the story, and we'll be back with more updates as things develop. Until then, stay curious and keep asking those tough questions.